For a few months towards the end of 2021, I was residing at my grandparents' old house. They had passed away some time prior, and my family hadn't sold the property yet. It was being used as a temporary vacation spot, but since I was between apartments for those months, it worked out as a place to stay. I wasn't thrilled about it though, because the house was really old and kind of dilapidated. Still, not having to pay rent was a plus. Anyway, this incident occurred about 2 months into my stay. I had just returned home from work at 6 p.m., parked in the driveway, and was heading to the mailbox to collect my mail when one of my neighbors approached me. It was an elderly woman I'd spoken with a few times before, mainly about my grandparents and my situation. During our previous conversations, I'd mentioned that I was temporarily staying in the house alone, which was the reason she was talking to me then. She remembered me saying a couple of days ago that I was the only one there. However, earlier that day, while walking around the neighborhood, she had seen someone moving behind the windows inside the house. She also noticed my car wasn't there, which worried her since she was fairly certain I was at work. I thanked her for the heads up, but honestly, I didn't fully register what she'd said. She didn't seem particularly convinced about what she saw anyway. And honestly, the idea seemed absurd. Why would anyone be inside my grandparents' old house? Still, as I walked inside, I quickly scanned the area for any signs of a break-in or that someone had moved things, but I saw nothing, not even a single footprint on the floor. It was definitely a strange and unsettling way to start my evening, but I hoped it really wasn't anything to worry about. I made dinner and watched TV in the living room for the rest of the night. It was a Friday, so I had the next 2 days off. I must have stayed up past 1 a.m. During that time, I'd basically forgotten about the whole thing my neighbor had told me. It kinda just felt like a regular night. Since it was very late, however, I turned off the TV and went upstairs. Now, when I'd gotten home earlier, the sun was still providing enough light for most of the house, so I hadn't turned on many lights, which made the entire house extremely dark now that it was the middle of the night. The only lights I had switched on were those in the bedroom when I changed out of my work clothes. I walked up the creaky wooden stairs to the second floor, then down the hallway and into the bedroom. This was a very old room, just like the rest of the house, but it had 2 distinct sections. There was the bed area containing, well, a bed, and then there was a small hallway leading to a closet and one of those old-fashioned vanity desks built into the wall. On the other side of that hallway was a large bathroom with a separate shower, bathtub, and way too many mirrors. It kinda creeped me out, to be honest. Anyway, I used the bathroom, turning off the lights in there as I returned to the bed area, and turned off those lights as well. However, immediately I realized something was amiss. There was still a light on. I turned around, and after a second, I felt my heart start racing a little bit. That small hallway, between the bed and the bathroom, had a light on. To give context as to why this was so disturbing, it was one of those single, old-fashioned light bulbs attached to the ceiling, with a thin string hanging down that you had to pull to turn it on or off. Because of this, I'd never once used that light. Furthermore, it was nearly impossible to accidentally turn it on or off, as it required pulling the string. I walked up to the hallway and stared at it. The fuzzy bluish glow from the light was barely visible through the fogged glass of the bulb. The fixture had to be decades old. I carefully reached up and pulled the string. The amount of force it took to actually turn it off was surprising. It definitely wouldn't just click on its own. The more I thought about it, the more nervous I got, especially as my neighbor's comment about seeing someone inside crept back into my mind. Looking back, I probably should have left right then, just to be safe. But I think it's easier than people realize to convince yourself it's all just some kind of fluke. Like, what if the light really did just turn on by itself? It was ancient. Maybe it wasn't working properly. And again, the chances of someone breaking into this old house, of all places, seemed incredibly small, so I really felt I needed concrete proof to believe it, let alone call 911 over it. I mean, a single light being on in the house that I never ever used was creepy and unsettling, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I didn't feel it was enough to really panic over, though I definitely wasn't going to get good sleep anytime soon. I turned the bedroom lights back on, but stayed in there with the door closed, figuring I'd sit in bed on my phone until I felt tired again. Over the next 30 minutes, I found myself repeatedly glancing at the door and the hallway leading to the bathroom, driven by paranoia. Even after making all those excuses, my gut still felt like something was off about the whole situation. I just didn't know what to do about it. I'd already searched the entire house earlier, but I figured maybe I should double check. I got up and opened the door to the main upstairs hallway. The house was eerily quiet. I took a few steps down the hallway to the spare bedroom and opened the door. It still contained my grandparents' old bed and furniture, along with a stack of boxes against the wall. I got a really unsettling feeling just being in that room. I know the intention was to actually search the house, but as soon as I stepped inside, my body just froze. My heart rate began to climb, getting faster and faster, like an internal alarm was going off, telling me to get out of that room immediately. Then I saw it, a shape protruding from under the covers on the bed. As I looked closer, I slowly made out the form of a body. Someone was in the bed under the covers. Immediate panic set in as I tried to back up, but I stumbled a bit, causing a loud creak on the wooden floor. Instantly, the person in the bed sat up so rapidly it was clear they weren't sleeping and were likely listening to my every move already. It was a man. His eyes locked onto mine, but that was all I could see before I bolted out of the room. His footsteps followed closely behind. I didn't stop running until I was out of the house and down the road at the neighbor's doorstep, the same one I'd spoken to earlier. She let me in and called for help. I was relieved that the police arrived relatively quickly, but the intruder must have fled right away because he was already gone. In the weeks that followed, my parents helped inventory everything they knew was in the house, or at least all the valuable items, and nothing was missing. Or, if anything was, it wasn't valuable. Which leads to the question, why was he there? Many people think he simply knew nobody lived there and was squatting, living there undetected. But what terrifies me, and makes me think that might not be the case, is that I'd been there for 2 months, so he had to know I was there. Was there a chance he'd been hiding, living there with me the entire time, without me realizing? And what would have happened if I hadn't discovered him and fled? I moved out immediately and haven't been back to the house since. I probably never will. Story 2. By Anonymous. I was on my way back from a road trip. It wasn't anything special, just visiting my parents for a few days. I always hated that the drive was 14 hours long, though. It was just too much to comfortably do in a single day, yet not long enough to justify getting a hotel and essentially doubling the driving time. I always forced myself to do it all in one day, which just completely took all the enjoyment out of the road trip. Anyway, I'd left my parents' place around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, so I was driving through the night. It wasn't a smart decision. I was tired and drowsy by midnight, but this part of the road wasn't through any cities or anything like that. It was just barren forest roads or open stretches of nothing. There were only a few gas stations occasionally, and maybe some dirt roads leading off to who knows where. I figured I'd stop whenever I saw the chance, and grab something to keep myself awake. A coffee, an energy drink, literally anything. I found a small gas station a little way down the road, hidden back in the trees off the side of the highway. It looked like a local place. Maybe a small town was back there, though it was naturally obscured by all the trees. There weren't even any streetlights leading down that road behind the gas station. As I pulled in, I noticed this gas station looked a bit odd. It wasn't like the modern ones with the huge overhang covering the pumps. It was just a few pumps sitting out in the open and no lights near them. Even the building itself didn't seem to have any lights on inside. All this made me think the place was definitely closed, or maybe even abandoned, if not for the 3 or 4 other cars parked in the lot. It genuinely looked like a typical old-school gas station on a desolate highway with other customers also present, except it wasn't nearly as lit up as it should have been. But I figured since others were there, it must still be open. I parked next to the other cars and got out. As I walked up to the door, all I could see was my reflection in the glass until I opened it. The instant I opened the door, the 4 or 5 people scattered throughout the shop immediately turned and looked at me, not just a quick glance. They all shifted and stared at the same time, their eyes fixed on me. The men's faces were all rugged and emotionless, but that's all I could see because, after being startled by them, I noticed not only was it incredibly dark inside, but it was also completely empty. All the shelves were still there, but there was nothing on them. Even after seeing that and looking back up at the men, they were still staring at me as if I didn't belong there. All of this happened in maybe 10 seconds before I backed up and let the door close, then hurried back to my car. I didn't know what the heck that was, but it felt like some strange cult meeting at an abandoned gas station that I accidentally walked into. I pulled away from the station and back onto the road. I guess this was one of those things you just don't think too hard about and move on from, because 10 minutes later, I had accepted that I'd never actually know what I walked in on, and was back to searching for a gas station. Hopefully, an open and safe one this time. The empty road didn't look very promising, though. Another 10 minutes passed when headlights appeared behind me. I was driving relatively fast, maybe 10 or 15 miles over the speed limit, and with no other cars out on the road, this was the first time someone had come up behind me in probably hours. Then there was another, maybe even several more. I couldn't really tell as all their lights seemed to blend together. They were all coming up very fast though. I moved into the right lane to let them pass, and the first one did, but quickly merged back in front of me. I was already slowing down a bit, aware of the situation, but I definitely wasn't expecting them to slam on their brakes. I nearly had a heart attack as I did the same, trying to swerve to avoid hitting them. I managed to stop just a couple of feet from their bumper with my car slightly angled, and that's when the reality hit me. This was one of the cars from the gas station. I checked the rearview mirror. The other car stopped right behind me, and another pulled up near my passenger door. In seconds, multiple men were getting out of the cars and surrounding my vehicle. If this were happening during the day, and not on some isolated road at 1 a.m. with nobody else around, I might have taken a safer approach. But given the circumstances, I felt I had no choice but to risk trying to escape. With cars blocking all the way forward, I drove off the road and into the trees, didn't go too far, then grabbed my phone and jumped out of the car. I sprinted into the forest. It was essentially pitch black, even just 30 feet into the trees. I kept running, hearing all the men's footsteps right behind me, but as I got deeper into the woods, I think they couldn't see enough to follow. I sat up against a tree and waited, maybe a whole hour without turning my phone on. I was scared one of them would be nearby and see the screen. So I sat there staring into the pitch black woods and listened to the leaves rustling in the branches above me. After that hour, I finally took out my phone and used the map function to find my way back to the road so I could get a signal and call 911. All the cars were gone except for mine, still stuck out there between the trees off the road. After that long night, a tow truck managed to get my car out, and surprisingly, it had almost no damage. As for whoever had been following me and trying to stop me, there's been no update. I think I've settled on the idea that the men likely thought I'd witnessed or seen something in that gas station that I shouldn't have. And so, they followed me in an attempt to cover their tracks, whether that meant kidnapping me or getting rid of me and hiding any evidence in the secluded forest off the road. The image of me walking into that gas station and all the men turning and staring at me is still burned into my mind. It still haunts me thinking about what could have happened. Story 3 by L.O. I'm writing this while the memory is still fresh. It only happened a couple of days ago. I had Tuesday and Wednesday off from work this week and was just hanging out at home. No plans, just relaxing and enjoying some quiet time alone. On Tuesday night, I thought ordering some food would be nice, just to save myself the time of cooking. So I opened DoorDash and found some random place that was still open and ordered a small meal. It said it would take about 45 minutes. I stayed in the living room and watched YouTube on the TV. Everything was fine up until this point. After roughly 45 minutes, I happened to get up and just casually glance out the window. I don't even know why I did really, since I could have easily just checked the app to see the delivery status. But when I looked out, I noticed a car parked in my driveway. Immediately, I opened DoorDash and checked the map. The delivery driver was still listed as being 10 minutes away. But then, who was in my driveway? I'm not really an assertive person, so I wasn't keen on going outside and saying something to them. I figured they'd probably realize they were in the wrong place and leave without me having to say anything. I went back to the sofa, but kept getting up and checking out the window every couple of minutes. When the DoorDash order arrived, the car was still parked in the driveway. From the window, I couldn't really see much inside the car. So when I answered the door for the delivery, I asked the driver if they'd seen anyone in there. He said, "Yeah, there was just some guy in the driver's seat, but he didn't really look too hard." I thanked him, and he left. I felt really uncomfortable about this. I tried to gather the courage to go out there and see what they were doing. But only 5 minutes after sitting down to eat, there was a knock at the door. I jumped up from the couch. My heart was racing, and I stood looking at the door for a minute before walking over slowly, trying to be quiet. When I looked out, no one was there. The car was still out there though. I took a deep breath and opened the door. I stepped outside. It was dark and quiet. I looked down the side of the porch but still saw no one, so I walked down the driveway and up to the car. When I looked through the window, whoever had been in there was gone. A chill ran over my body. I moved to the back of the car to get the license plate, only to find it didn't have one. That made me even more scared, because it made me think whoever this guy was, he had planned for this. I moved away from the car to head back inside as I was really starting to get uncomfortable and felt it was now definitely time to call the police. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, but immediately I got a really strange feeling. The house was quiet, but it was like my senses picked up on something being wrong. I crept over to the living room and looked at the couch. My phone was gone. Every nerve in my body felt like it just stung with fear. Before I could even make myself move, I heard the slow sound of a door hinge creaking open. Then a few footsteps moved quietly down the hallway toward the front door, but they stopped just before the corner. They were waiting there, right around the corner near the front door. I couldn't just run out. I was frozen for a few moments, then started to very carefully and quietly make my way to the other side of the house. No matter which way I went, I'd have to pass by the hallway where I knew the man was. So, whatever I was going to do, I knew I had to do it fast. I hesitated for a second. I think the anxiety of what I was about to do took over for a moment, but then I got a hold of myself and made a dead sprint for the back door. I unlocked it and ran out of the house. And just as I stepped out the door, I heard the man behind me call out my name. Not just my first name, but my last name too. It confused and shocked me enough to make me turn around and look back. The man was barreling toward the back door, and I could see most of his face, but I recognized him. I turned back and continued running. The area behind my house was just a flat extension of the neighborhood. Not really any places to hide. I could hear the man still chasing me though. I kept running, making it past the next row of houses, and decided to just start running down the sidewalk, hoping a car or someone would come by to help me. But after a few minutes, I looked back and the guy there. It took a long time to find someone willing to help me call the police. By then, the man wasn't anywhere around, having taken his car and fled. And apparently, he was smarter than I thought, because I immediately tried tracking my phone, but he'd tossed it in my front yard before leaving, so we couldn't track it to find him. If this were just a regular break-in or robbery or whatever, I'd be a lot less traumatized, but clearly it wasn't that. There was more to it. This was a stalker, having known my full name and likely a whole lot more about me. There's no telling how long he'd been watching me for or what he wanted to do. It's only been a few days though, and I'm already planning to move far away. I can't sit around knowing whoever that was still knows where I live. If there are any updates in the next few weeks, I'll try to let you know.